I never thought that the person who would humiliate me in front of a room full of people would be someone I had once welcomed into my home with open arms. It happened on a warm summer evening, inside a glittering banquet hall, filled with gold-rimmed glasses, perfectly arranged flowers, and people who looked at me like I didn't belong there. My daughter-in-law Olivia had organized a dinner to celebrate family. Little did I know, that night would be the last time I ever let anyone treat me as if I were less than them. I was standing near the back of the room, quietly watching the guests laugh and clink their glasses. I had worn my best navy blue dress, the same one I'd worn to my son's graduation. It wasn't designer, but it was clean, pressed, and full of memories. I smiled when Olivia approached me with that polished, cold smile she always wore when others were watching. Then she leaned closer, her voice sharp enough to cut through the music. "You should stand over there," she whispered, gesturing toward the staff area. "That's where lower-class trash belongs." For a moment, I froze. Her words hit me like a slap I didn't see coming. I felt every pair of eyes in that room burning into my back, even if no one had actually heard. I forced a smile, pretending it hadn't shaken me to my core. But inside, something cracked open. I'd worked my entire life as a nurse, raised my son alone after my husband passed, and bought my little house with my own hands. I had nothing to be ashamed of. I excused myself, stepping out into the hallway where the sound of laughter faded behind me. My hands were trembling, but not from weakness, from anger. She thought she could humiliate me and get away with it. She had no idea who she was dealing with. That night, as I stood alone under the soft glow of the corridor lights, a quiet decision took root inside me. But let me start from the beginning. When David first brought Olivia home, I remember thinking she looked like she'd just stepped out of one of those glossy magazines. Perfect hair, flawless smile, designer handbag dangling casually from her arm. My son was glowing, almost like a teenager again. At 32, David had always been focused on work and family, not parties or flashy dates. So when he said he'd finally found someone serious, I was genuinely happy for him. "Mom," he'd said as he opened the door, "this is Olivia." She reached out her hand delicately, as if touching mine might leave a mark on her skin. "Anna," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "I've heard so much about you." She was polite, perfectly polite, and yet there was something in the way her gaze swept through my small living room. The hand-me-down furniture, the framed pictures on the walls, the floral curtains I'd sewn years ago, that made me suddenly aware of everything that wasn't expensive. I told myself I was imagining it. Over the next few weeks, Olivia became a regular presence. She came over with David for Sunday dinners, the way he'd always done since he'd moved out. But unlike him, she noticed everything. "This house is quaint," she said one evening, tilting her head as she ran her fingers along the old wooden dining table, "like something out of a little storybook." It wasn't the word itself, it was the tone, a silk glove wrapped around a knife. I laughed softly, trying not to let it sting. "It's been home for a long time. Everything here has a story." She smiled in that same practiced way. How sweet. She didn't mean it. David didn't notice. He was too busy cutting roast chicken, telling her stories from his childhood. Watching him, I convinced myself that maybe Olivia just needed time to adjust. Maybe she wasn't used to modest places like mine. But then came the second remark. David had proudly told her how I worked as a nurse for over 30 years. I saw the way her nose wrinkled ever so slightly. "Oh, that's adorable," she said. "That kind of old-fashioned dedication is rare these days." Old-fashioned, adorable, like I was some relic from a less sophisticated world. Later that night, as I washed dishes alone, I heard her laughter echoing from the living room. I told myself not to be sensitive. She just comes from a different world, I thought. This is about David's happiness, not mine. But those small moments began to pile up like dust on a shelf no one bothers to clean. A few months into their engagement, Olivia started planning the wedding with a level of extravagance I could barely keep up with. "I was thinking Chateau Bellevue for the reception," she said one evening, as we sat at my kitchen table. "It's where my parents hosted their last fundraiser. The flowers alone will be about 15,000 euros, but it's worth it." I nearly choked on my tea. 15,000 euros for flowers. She laughed lightly, as if my reaction were cute. "Well, we don't want it to look cheap. Don't worry, David will handle it." The thing is, David doesn't have that kind of money. He works hard as an engineer, earns a decent living, but not the kind that funds palace weddings. I realized then she expected either her family or, worse, me to help make her dream wedding happen. She began dropping hints. It's tradition for the groom's family to contribute, isn't it? She said, tracing circles on her champagne flute at dinner one night. I swallowed hard. My pension and savings were enough for me to live comfortably, not to fund a spectacle. When I expressed my concern, she smiled sweetly. Of course, Anna, I didn't mean to pressure you. It's just, appearances matter. Appearances matter. That was Olivia in a nutshell. I began noticing how David seemed blinded by love. Whenever I tried to gently point out something, he brushed it off. She's just excited, Mom, he said, waving his hand. She's not trying to be rude. Not trying, but succeeding anyway. One afternoon, as Olivia's parents came over for coffee, I realized exactly where she got it from. Her mother, Sylvia, sat on my couch with a look that screamed charity work. Her father, Charles, talked about investments and prestige clubs like it was the only language worth speaking. This is cozy, Sylvia said with a perfectly poised smile. David told us you live here alone. It must be so simple. I pressed my lips together, forcing myself to smile back. It's home. That's what matters. Their eyes said they disagreed. After they left, I sat in my living room, staring at the photos of David as a little boy on the mantelpiece. I remembered the years I spent working double shifts to keep this house, and yet they made it sound like a shabby charity project. Martha, my best friend since nursing school, noticed the change in me. Anna, you don't owe them anything, she said one afternoon as we sat on my porch, drinking coffee. You've raised a good man. If they can't see your worth, that's their problem. Peter, my neighbor, was even more blunt. People like that think money makes them better than others. It doesn't. Watch yourself. I nodded, but in my heart, I still hoped it would get better. I told myself I was just being too sensitive, too protective of my son. She loves him, I kept repeating in my head. She learned to love me too. But the distance between us grew like an invisible wall. Olivia stopped hiding her tone when she made her comments. She was careful enough to keep David in the dark, but when it was just the two of us, the masks slipped. You're lucky, she said once, straightening a photo frame on my wall. Most men from families like ours don't marry down. That night, lying awake in my quiet room, I replayed every moment, every look, every word, and I whispered to myself, I should have seen the signs. I just didn't want to. The night of the engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. Olivia had planned it for weeks, or rather, her mother had. She made sure to emphasize that it would be an event everyone would remember. I just didn't realize I'd be the one who would never forget it for all the wrong reasons. The venue was one of those historic estates on the edge of the city, the kind with chandeliers that probably cost more than my entire house. When I arrived, I felt that old nervous flutter in my stomach, the kind I used to get on my first days as a nurse. Everyone was dressed to perfection. Suits, silk gowns, diamonds. I clutched my simple black handbag a little tighter, telling myself I was overthinking it. David beamed when he saw me. Mom, you made it. Of course I did, I said, smiling. I wouldn't miss it for the world. He hugged me tightly. It was the warmth of that hug that kept me steady through what happened next. But Olivia appeared at his side in a shimmering champagne-colored dress, the kind that sparkled even when the light didn't hit it. Anna, she said smoothly, kissing the air near my cheek. How lovely that you could make it. How lovely. I nodded politely. Congratulations on everything. You've done a beautiful job with the decorations. She tilted her head, feigning modesty. Oh well, we wanted it to reflect a certain standard. Her eyes flicked to my dress, then back to my face. That same silky blade again. I forced myself to smile. Later in the evening, I found myself at the drinks table, talking with one of David's old school friends. I liked being around the people who had known him when life was simpler. It was there, in that corner of the glittering room, that I heard Olivia's voice. She was behind me, speaking to a group of guests, some of her friends, some of her family. Her tone was light, playful, but the words, "She's sweet," Olivia said, loud enough for me to hear. But I mean, David's mom isn't exactly our kind of people. A chorus of polite laughter followed. She grew up, what was it, working class? A woman asked. Olivia giggled. Oh Loa, she was a nurse. Isn't that adorable? Like something out of a little Hallmark story. I mean, look at her. She tries. I gripped my glass so tightly I thought it might crack. My face burned. My throat tightened. Every word was a needle. Someone else added, "You're so generous to include her in everything." Oh, of course, Olivia replied sweetly. David would never forgive me if I didn't. It's like having a project, you know. I mean, she doesn't fit the image, but I can work with that. Laughter again. I turned around slowly. They didn't notice me at first. I caught Olivia's eye for just a split second. Her face froze. Then she smiled, that same perfect, polished smile, and raised her glass like nothing happened. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I had worked my whole life to build something for my son, something decent, something honest. I didn't have chandeliers or designer gowns, but I had pride, and in one careless sentence, she had stripped that away like it meant nothing. I stepped outside to breathe. The night air was cool, the fountain lights dancing across the courtyard. I pressed a hand to my chest and whispered to myself, "Don't cry here. Don't let her see you break." That was when I heard it, Olivia's voice again, this time quieter, more serious. She was standing just around the corner, speaking to someone. "Honestly," she whispered, "David is perfect for me because he's so easy to manage. His family is nothing. It makes me look better. Marrying him gives me that wholesome, hard-working image people love. It's marketing. My parents love it." I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding. "You don't even love him?" a friend asked. "Love," Olivia scoffed. "Please, I love what comes with it. He'll do anything for me." And I knew she meant me. She's the kind of woman who'll just sit quietly in the corner and smile, a background character. It's perfect. My nails dug into my palm. Inside, the engagement speeches began. Sylvia, Olivia's mother, gave a grand toast about elevating family legacies. Charles, her father, spoke about merging powerful names. I couldn't help but notice that no one from my side of the family was even mentioned. When David stepped up, his speech was sweet and sincere. He spoke about love, loyalty, and how much Olivia meant to him. He thanked me for raising him to love fully. My chest tightened. He truly believed this was love. I forced myself to clap along with everyone else, even as bile rose in my throat. Then came the final blow. During dinner, as I tried to help a waitress who nearly dropped a tray of glasses, Olivia appeared behind me. Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the music. "Why don't you leave that to people who actually work for a living?" she whispered. "We wouldn't want anyone confusing you with staff. Lower-class trash has its place." I froze. I could feel the blood draining from my face. A few people glanced over, curious, but Olivia's smile was so bright, so fake, that no one guessed what she had said. That was the moment something in me shifted. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every cruel word. For years, I had prided myself on being kind, patient, and forgiving, but this was different. I thought about my late husband, about the promise I'd made to raise David with dignity. I thought about the nights I came home exhausted from 12-hour shifts, the years I went without vacations, the meals I skipped so David could have what he needed, and she, someone who'd never worked for anything in her life, thought she could erase all of that with a single insult. She's using him, I thought. She's using my son like a trophy. But then, something else started to click. The way she'd talked about her legacy, the way her parents bragged about their investments. I'd seen enough real wealth during my years at the hospital to know when something didn't add up. Their stories were rehearsed. Their names dropped, were vague. They talked about money, but never specifics. I remembered Olivia mentioning their family villa in France. When I'd asked which part, she'd stumbled. Her father bragged about real estate, but couldn't remember the name of the supposed development company. A memory surfaced, something my friend Martha had told me months earlier. She'd worked for a family once who pretended to be wealthy but were drowning in debt. Appearances matter, Olivia had said. What if that was all this was? Appearances. I sat up in bed. For the first time that night, I wasn't crying. I was thinking. Strategizing. The next morning, I met Martha at the cafe near the town square. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said, frowning. "I didn't," I admitted. "Martha, something's wrong with that family. They act rich, but none of it fits together. And last night, Olivia," my throat tightened as I repeated what she'd said to me. Martha's face darkened. "That girl needs to be put in her place." I took a deep breath. I think she's hiding something, or her parents are. I need to know what I'm dealing with. Martha leaned closer. "Anna, are you sure?" "Yes," I said quietly. "If she can stand there and call me trash, she should at least be standing on something real. I have a feeling it's all smoke and mirrors." That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to beg for respect anymore. I was going to uncover the truth. That night at the engagement party was supposed to make me feel small. Instead, it gave me clarity. She has no idea who she's dealing with. That was the night my revenge began. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with quiet, cold resolve. After that night I slept very little. The anger was not loud. It was a steady hum that would not go away. I needed facts, not fury. I could have marched into Olivia's parents' garden and shouted accusations, but that would have made me into the kind of person I did not want to be. I wanted something cleaner, proof. So I began to build it. First, I made a list. Names, phrases, moments that didn't fit. Family villa in France, investment firm, philanthropy gala. The odd references to Chateau Bellevue. I wrote down dates when Olivia had said specific things and where. The cafe on the 12th of June, the fundraiser she mentioned on the 3rd of March, the reference to an estate lawyer named Mr. Beaumont. I dated the list. The 7th of July 2025. Writing it down calmed me. It turned vague suspicion into a map. Martha was my first call. We met the next morning at her kitchen table. "I'll help," she said without hesitation. She knew how I worked as a nurse, methodical, thorough. Peter offered too. He knew people in town and had an eye for detail. He promised to ask around discreetly at the hardware store and the post office. "Small towns talk," he said. "They always do." I also reconnected with a former patient of mine, Alina Gruber, who now worked at the district courthouse. Alina owed me a favor from years ago when I helped her through chemo. She agreed to look up public records for anything connected to the names Olivia had mentioned. She told me, "I can't do anything illegal, Anna, but I can pull public filings and company registrations." That was enough. I started with the obvious, business registrations. On the 14th of July, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of printed documents. Alina had emailed me company names, registration numbers, and addresses. One of the firms, Bellevue Holdings, listed an office in a small service-based address, not the sprawling headquarters Olivia had implied. The director's listed home was a rental in the next town, not a family villa. Then came financial records. Public filings revealed liens and unpaid taxes against a property associated with one of the names they dropped. I took notes. 32,450 euros in unpaid municipal fees for a property on Rue des Oliviers in Aline filed the 2nd of February 2024, and a debt claim from a catering company for 8,900 euros dated 11.11/2023. Those numbers felt like fingerprints. They made the facade fragile. I watched Olivia without staring. I listened to offhand remarks at family dinners and charity events. I photographed receipts and business cards when they were left carelessly on tables. Peter took a picture of Mr. Beaumont's car license plate when he saw it outside Sylvia's townhouse. Little things added up. There were moments of doubt. Am I being petty? Am I hurting my son by digging? Those thoughts haunted quiet evenings. I talked them through with Martha. If I do nothing, she will use him, I told her. If I tell David now, he will defend her. Martha squeezed my hand. Then you gather the truth and show him when it matters. We built a quiet file folder. Copies of registrations, screenshots of social media posts that didn't match the lavish claims, invoices, and notes from vendors who said they had not been paid. We even spoke to a caterer who admitted they had been pressured to lower their prices at the last minute and were still owed money. He signed a short statement for us. That every step made me more certain and more nervous. I wasn't acting out of revenge alone. I was protecting my son from a lie dressed up as glamour. I reminded myself, I will be careful. I will be fair. I will let truth do the work. The plan was not to humiliate for the sake of pain, but to reveal reality and give David a choice. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Olivia and her parents were planning a pre-wedding gala. Ridiculous spectacle with a guest list that read like a society page. They wanted everyone to see how elevated this marriage was going to be. It was scheduled for the 10th of September at the Grand Palais, a place where chandeliers hang like frozen fireworks, and even the air smells expensive. I knew that if I wanted to stop this sham, it had to be on their stage, in their world, where they felt untouchable. I had spent weeks collecting documents, statements, and tiny, inconvenient truths. Now it was time to weave it together like thread pulled tight. On the day of the gala, I dressed carefully. A simple black dress, the same one from the engagement party. This time, though, I wasn't nervous. My hair was pinned neatly, my back straight. I looked in the mirror and whispered to myself, "You are not trash." When I arrived, the room glittered with people who liked to think their worth could be measured in champagne bubbles. Olivia spotted me from across the room and smiled like a queen greeting a loyal servant. "Anna," she said sweetly. I didn't think you'd actually come. I wouldn't miss it, I replied calmly. The event began with speeches. Olivia's father stood on a small stage, booming about family honor, legacy, wealth. I watched as guests nodded politely, most of them there for the free drinks and networking. Olivia shone in the center of it all, David at her side, adorably, painfully in love. When the host called for a toast to celebrate the merging of two great families, I knew this was it. I stepped forward slowly, the sound of my heels deliberate on the marble floor. Excuse me, I said, my voice calm but clear. Heads turned, glasses lowered. Olivia blinked in confusion. Anna, David said gently. I walked onto the small stage, took the microphone from the stand, and smiled at the room. Before we raise our glasses, I'd like to say a few words. Olivia froze. Her father's smile stiffened. I began softly, like I was telling a story to old friends. I'm Anna. Many of you don't know me well, but I'm David's mother. I'm not from wealth. I was a nurse for over 30 years. I raised my son in a little house filled with love, not chandelier. And I thought tonight, as families come together, it would be the perfect time to speak about truth. A murmur moved through the room. I was told I wasn't the right kind of people, that I belonged in the shadows, behind the staff. And perhaps to some of you, I still do. But what you might not know, I paused, is that some shadows reveal things others would rather keep hidden. Olivia's mother took a small step forward, panic flickering across her perfectly composed face. I opened my clutch and took out a thin folder, the one I'd spent sleepless nights preparing. You see, when someone calls you lower-class trash, it makes you start paying attention. My voice was steady now, strong. I found it strange how often I heard about family estates that didn't seem to exist on any land registry, investment companies with no active filings, villas in France that never hosted a single registered owner. I lifted the first sheet. Bellevue Holdings. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? Except it's a shell company registered to a serviced address above a hair salon in Marseille. No staff, no operations, no assets. Murmurs grew louder. A man in the back actually laughed quietly. I held up another paper. Property on Rue des Oliviers, €32,450 in unpaid municipal fees. Lien filed the 2nd of February 2024. Another unpaid invoice to a catering company, €8,900, dated the 11th of November 2023. And that's not all. There are 3 active debt claims in France, and at least 1 investigation open in Germany. Olivia's father stepped forward, voice low but sharp. Anna, I don't know what game you think you're playing. It's not a game, I interrupted. It's public record. I turned to the crowd. You've all been told a story about a wealthy family, about class, but what you're looking at is a family drowning in debt, selling illusions to anyone who listens, and they nearly sold it to my son. A ripple ran through the guests. Olivia's carefully constructed facade began to crack. David stared at me, confusion twisting into shock. Mom, what is this? I met his eyes. The truth, David. I couldn't stand by and watch them use you. Olivia tried to grab the microphone, hissing through clenched teeth. You don't know what you're talking about, but I did. And I wasn't done. I pulled out a printed screenshot. Here's a lovely email chain between Sylvia and a wedding planner, where she admits they're overextended financially, but must maintain appearances. Her words, not mine. Gasps, whispers. One of the guests actually took a step back from the family, like the lies might be contagious. And here, I continued, raising the last page, is a signed statement from a caterer saying he hasn't been paid for their last charity event. The same event Olivia claimed raised over €50,000 for children. That money, I said slowly, never reached the charity. The air left the room. Olivia's face turned pale, then red. For years, they had looked down on me as if I was beneath them. But in that moment, it was them standing small beneath the weight of their lies. Sylvia finally snapped. How dare you humiliate us? How dare you call someone trash? I answered softly. Security staff exchanged confused glances, unsure whether to intervene. David just stood there, breathing hard, the truth unraveling everything in his mind. Olivia reached for him desperately. David, she's lying. It's all lies. You know my family. He looked at her with wide, betrayed eyes. Do I? The host tried to regain control, awkwardly tapping the microphone. Perhaps we should, but the guests weren't listening. Some were already leaving. Others whispered behind their hands. A journalist from a local lifestyle magazine was there that night. I hadn't expected that, but I saw the flash of a camera, the scribble of notes. The cracks had become a landslide. Later, after most of the guests had fled, the family stood huddled together in the corner like porcelain dolls about to break. David sat at the bar, silent. I walked over and placed the folder beside him. "I'm sorry it had to be like this," I said gently. He swallowed. How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "I didn't want to destroy anything, David. I wanted to save you." His eyes were glassy. "She said she loved me." I took his hand. "She loved the story she could build around you." The next morning, everything unraveled further. The journalist had published a short piece about the cracked porcelain image of a society family. Legal authorities started looking into the financial records. The catering company filed another claim. It turned out Bellevue Holdings had already been flagged for tax irregularities. Olivia tried to call David. He didn't pick up. Sylvia left a voicemail for me, screaming, "You've ruined everything." I listened to it twice, then deleted it. The most powerful moment came 2 weeks later, when Olivia came to my house, unannounced. She was dressed down, no designer clothes, no polished smile, just a woman whose cards had been laid on the table. "You're proud of yourself, aren't you?" she spat. I opened the door wider. "No, Olivia, I'm not proud of hurting David, but I'm proud I didn't let you hurt him worse." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said softly, "but I know exactly who I am. You had to invent who you were." She flinched. She left without another word. David called off the wedding the next day. It wasn't a shouting match. It was quiet, final, and devastating. "I don't even know who I was engaged to," he told me. I held him as he cried, grown man, broken heart. But finally, seeing clearly, Olivia's family's empire of appearances crumbled fast. Vendors came forward. Debt collectors followed. Those who had once admired them now avoided them. The high society circle they adored turned its back the moment their wealth proved hollow. And me. I went back to my quiet home, my small, quaint house with its floral curtains, and for the first time in months, I breathed. Olivia had called me trash, but when all the gold peeled away, she was left standing in ruins of her own lies, while I still had my dignity. She had underestimated the woman she tried to humiliate, and that was her biggest mistake. In the weeks that followed, the world around Olivia and her parents collapsed like a house built out of wet paper. All it had taken was one night, one folder, of carefully gathered truths, and their shiny castle of illusions began to rot in the light of day. 2 days after the gala, articles started appearing in the local press. What had been whispered in corners during their parties was now printed in black ink for everyone to see. "Influential family accused of living on borrowed luxury," one headline read. Another bluntly called them the pretend aristocrats of Bellevue. I didn't have anything to do with the journalists. They found the breadcrumbs all on their own. That's the thing about people who build their lives on lies. The truth is always sitting there, waiting to be noticed. I watched it all quietly from my kitchen table, my cup of chamomile tea in my hand. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't gloating. I was simply breathing again. For months, I'd felt this constant weight pressing down on me, the sense of not being enough for their world. But now I could finally feel my shoulders loosen. David moved back into my house temporarily. He arrived one evening with just a single suitcase, his face pale and tired. "I can't stay there anymore," he said quietly. I opened my arms without a single word. He hugged me the way he did when he was a boy, and the world outside felt too big. The first few days were quiet between us. He spent hours in his old room, sorting through memories that now tasted different. He wasn't just mourning a broken engagement, he was mourning the image he'd built of a woman who never truly existed. Olivia, meanwhile, tried to fight the storm. She issued a polished statement online calling everything misunderstandings and attacks from jealous people. But the damage was already done. Once you present yourself as royalty and someone shows the peasants you don't have a crown, you can't just tape the illusion back together. Vendors came forward with more claims. A charity organization announced the legal review of their fundraiser. A tax investigator visited their family estate, which turned out to be a rented villa under a short-term contract. It was over. I didn't need to lift a finger anymore. The truth was doing the work I had started. One evening, about a month after the gala, David and I sat outside on the porch. The air was crisp. The garden smelled faintly of rosemary and lavender. He hadn't said much about Olivia since that night, but now, with the quiet wrapping around us, He finally opened up. She made me feel like we were building a future together, he said, staring at the darkening sky. And all that time, it was just a show. I feel like such a fool, Mom. I reached for his hand. Falling in love doesn't make you a fool. Believing the best in someone isn't a weakness. What matters is that you see the truth now. His eyes glistened. You saved me. I squeezed his hand gently. No, you saved yourself the moment you listened. That was the difference. I could have screamed and warned him months earlier, but he wouldn't have believed me. Love has a way of silencing the voices of reason, but the truth has a way of shouting when it matters most. A few days later, Olivia tried to call David again. He answered once. I was in the kitchen, listening to the silence through the hallway. She started with apologies, then moved to tears, then to begging. I could hear her voice breaking, words tumbling fast. I didn't mean it. I was scared, my parents, but David's voice was steady. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of what I could make you look like. There was a long pause. Then he ended the call, and that was it. No shouting, no drama, just a door closing quietly and permanently. By late autumn, their family had sold off whatever was left of their image. Sylvia and Charles disappeared from the social scene they had once dominated. Olivia's social media accounts went silent. I heard through whispers that she'd left the city. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt free. For the first time in a long time, David and I started rebuilding our life without their shadows hanging over us. We planted new flowers in the garden. We cooked dinner together again, the way we used to before everything got complicated. One evening, he looked around the kitchen and said softly, I never appreciated how warm this house is. Not until I lost what wasn't real. Martha and Peter came over often, usually bringing homemade cake or fresh bread. They never said, I told you so. They didn't need to. They knew. It's funny, Martha said one night over coffee, how people like her try to make others feel small, just to hide the cracks in their own lives. I nodded. She thought power came from pretending to be above others, but real power is quiet. It's the kind that doesn't need to prove itself. And me, I finally slept through the night. I stopped replaying that awful sentence in my head, lower class trash. It no longer cut me. It had become a memory of a battle I fought and won, not with cruelty, but with truth. David began smiling again, slowly but surely. He started running in the mornings, something he hadn't done since college. He even went back to playing guitar in the evenings. I'd stand in the doorway, watching him, grateful that I still had my son, not the polished version Olivia wanted, but the real David. I learned something important in that aftermath. When someone builds their power on looking down at others, the truth isn't just their weakness, it's their undoing. And me. I had nothing to be ashamed of. Not my house, not my work, not my background. I had roots, something Olivia's family never really had. The storm had passed, and what remained standing was me. Sometimes I still think about that night, the moment she leaned in and called me lower-class trash. The words that were meant to break me became the spark that built a fire inside me. A quiet, steady fire that didn't burn me, but burned away every lie they'd wrapped around my son. I look around my home now, the same little house, Olivia mocked. The curtains are still the ones I sewed 20 years ago. The dining table still carries faint scratches from the nights David did his homework here. Nothing is new, but everything feels stronger, truer. I used to feel small in this house after being in their world. Now I know that this house stood on real ground. Theirs crumbled because it was built on nothing. People like Olivia will always exist. They build their identities on appearances, on pretending they're better than someone else. And when they meet someone who isn't playing their game, they try to shame them into silence. But here's the thing. Shame only works if you let it. I didn't need revenge in the form of cruelty. I didn't need to scream or fight dirty. All I needed was the truth. Because truth, once spoken out loud, has a way of echoing louder than any insult. David is healing. Slowly. He has started laughing again, living again. I've started walking in the mornings, tending my garden, and letting the world be quiet again. And every time I feel the echo of those words, trash, lower class, I remind myself of what came after. I hope that anyone who's ever been made to feel small remembers this. You are not defined by the way someone else looks at you. You are defined by the strength you carry when they try to break you. So, if someone ever calls you less than, ask yourself, who are they without their lies? Because when everything else falls away, the truth always stands.